Chapter 1, The Human Body and Orientation. The learning objectives for this chapter include defining anatomy and physiology, explaining how anatomy and physiology are related, name the 6 levels of structural organization and explain how they are related, name the organ systems of the body and briefly state the major functions of each system, identify and classify by organ system all organs discussed, list 8 functions that humans must perform to maintain life, list the 5 survival needs of the human body, verbally describe or demonstrate the anatomical position, use proper anatomical terminology to describe body directions, surfaces, and body planes, locate the major cavities and list the chief organs in each cavity, define homeostasis and explain its importance, and define negative feedback and describe its role in maintaining homeostasis and normal body function. You can see the graphic here on the left. I pulled all of the graphics directly from your text for the most part, and we'll go a little more into those initial definitions and the connection between anatomy and physiology in the oncoming slides. Before we look at how anatomy and physiology relate to one another, let's look at how they're different, or what they mean independently. Anatomy is the what? It's derived from the Greek, so tomi, to cut, ana, apart, so to cut apart. And it's the study of the structure and shape of the body and its parts and their relationships to one another. So this is just structure. Gross anatomy is the large and easily observable structure, so this is what I can see just by looking at you, by assessing your external appearance, having you open your mouth, etc. Microscopic anatomy is too small to be seen with the naked eye, so this is like your cells and your tissues. This requires something a little more invasive, whether that's drawing blood or cutting somebody open. Physiology is the how. Physio, nature, ology, the study of, so the study of nature. So it's the study of how the body and its parts work or function. So DTR, define the relationship between anatomy and physiology. So essentially they are inseparable. Body forms a well-organized unit, and each of those parts has a job to do to make the body operate as a whole. In the case of the human body, structure determines function. So the example in the book is the lungs. The lungs are not muscular chambers like the heart, therefore they cannot pump blood. However, their walls are thin and they can exchange gases and provide oxygen to the body. Now let's talk about the levels of structural organization. So here on the right is again a graphic pulled directly from your text, and you can see that it's labeled 1 through 6. So at our first level we have the chemical level, atoms, the tiny building blocks of matter, which then combine to form molecules, things like water, sugar, and proteins. Those molecules associate in a specific way to form cells, and the cells are the smallest unit of all living things. So they do all have very common structure and overall function, but vary in size, shape, and role. So groups of similar cells with common roles will then form tissues, which there are 4 types, which we'll talk about in a later slide. 2 or more tissue types that perform a specified function in the body are considered an organ. So you can see here on the right, we have connective tissue, smooth muscle, epithelial, and it's making a blood vessel, which is considered an organ. Organs perform complex functions. A group of organs that work together to accomplish a common purpose, such as the heart, blood vessels, make up an organ system. And in the example on the right, it's the cardiovascular system. Combine all of the organ systems and you get a living organism. And in our case, it's a human being. Listed here are the 11 organ systems. I'm just going to review the basics at this point. As we continue on in the course, we will dive a little deeper into each. So first we have the integumentary system. This is your body's external covering. It includes your skin, hair, and nails. It provides waterproofing and protection for deeper tissues. Skin plus sunlight equals vitamin D. It also excretes salt through sweating and then helps regulate body temperature. There are also sensory receptors present that alert us to what is happening on our body surface. Next, we have the skeletal system. This is comprised of bones, cartilages, and joints. This supports your body and provides a frame for your skeletal muscles, which is how you move. It also has protective functions. Example, the skull protects the brain. Additionally, minerals are stored in the bones and blood cells are formed here. The muscular system, mentioned during the skeletal system, its primary function is to contract or shorten so that movement can occur, and the skeletal muscles are the large fleshy muscles attached to the bones. The nervous system, comprised of the brain, spinal cord, nerves, and sensory receptors. It does have internal and external functions. So examples of external stimuli would be light, sound, temperatures, and internal stimuli, decreases in oxygen. And sensory receptors respond to these stimuli and then they send messages to your brain and spinal cord so it stays informed and can react accordingly. It's also called, it's like a fast acting control system. So it's innate, it's automatic. Your endocrine system. So similar to this nervous system, but slower, and it works to regulate your body via hormone production. So hormones travel to distant target organs. This will include the pituitary, the thyroid, parathyroid, adrenals, thymus, pancreas, pineal, ovaries, and testes. This system is unique in that it is not physically connected as the rest of the systems are, but that it is connected by its function and hormone production and regulation. The cardiovascular system, so your heart and blood vessels. Blood carries oxygen, nutrients, hormones, and other substances. Additionally, it picks up waste like carbon dioxide. White blood cells and other immune-mediated chemicals are also carried in the blood, so you can see that this is a very important system function in your body. The lymphatic system. It complements the cardiovascular system, made up of lymphatic vessels, lymph nodes, and lymphoid organs. So lymphoid organs would be things like your spleen, your tonsils. Sometimes fluid leaks from the blood vessels into the tissue for a number of reasons, and the lymphatic system returns it. Things like lymph nodes and the lymphoid organs help to cleanse the blood and house white blood cells. So it is also part of your immune response. So this is sometimes when you're not feeling well, you have a viral illness, you'll have some lymph nodes that are enlarged in maybe your neck, maybe like right at the bottom of your neck. This is your immune system working. A lot of people get very concerned about it, but your immune system's doing its job. Respiratory. So respiratory is charged with gas exchange. So exchanging oxygen and carbon dioxide. Taking in the oxygen, releasing the carbon dioxide. Quite important. It starts at your nasal passages, goes to your pharynx, your larynx, trachea, bronchi, and to your lungs. The tiny air sacs in the lungs are called alveoli, and the thin walls of the alveoli is where the gas exchange occurs. Next, we have the digestive system. So front end to back end, mouth to anus. So it does begin in your mouth, goes to your esophagus, your stomach, small and large intestines, rectum, plus accessory organs like the liver, which provides bile to break down fats, salivary glands, pancreas, which delivers digestive enzymes to the small intestine. It also has endocrine functions. Your digestive system is charged with breaking down food and then delivering nutrients to the blood, and any undigested food or unbroken down food leaves the body as feces. The urinary system. So your excretory system. Urea and uric acid contain nitrogen, which is considered a waste byproduct, and this is the result of the body cells breaking down protein and nucleic acid and is removed via urine. The system is composed of the kidneys, your ureters, bladder, and urethra. Additionally, it maintains the body's water and electrolyte balance, so your salt balance. It maintains the acid-base balance of the blood and helps to regulate blood pressure. And lastly, your reproductive system, with its chief goal of producing offspring. So we have the female reproductive organs being the ovaries, which produce the eggs, the uterine tubes, the uterus, and the vagina, and then the male organs, the scrotum, the penis, accessory glands, and the duct system to carry sperm outside of the body. Necessary life functions. So human beings are able to maintain their boundaries, move, respond to environmental changes, take in and digest nutrients, carry out metabolism, dispose of waste, reproduce themselves, and grow. We can see here on the right, organ systems do not work in isolation. Rather, they work together to promote the well-being of the entire body. So let's just walk through this. So the digestive system is taking in nutrients, excreting of absorbed matter. There at the bottom, the feces is excreted. You can see halfway through that process, the nutrients are being put into the cardiovascular system, which is distributing oxygen and nutrients to all body cells, and delivers waste and carbon dioxide to disposal organs. The oxygen and the CO2 are being exchanged in the lungs and the respiratory system. And then in the urinary system is where the blood is being filtered and nitrogen containing waste is being excreted and urine is excreted. And the whole time, all the way around, the integumentary system is protecting the body as a whole so that all these internal organ systems can be functioning properly. So let's dive in deeper to each of these necessary life functions. So maintaining boundaries. Basically, inside remains distinct from outside. For very obvious reasons, this is important. This is all the way down to the cellular level. Cells of the human body have an external memory that separates them and separates its contents from the outside interstitial fluid. It also allows entry of needed substances while generally preventing entry of potentially damaging or unnecessary substances. The body as a whole, the boundary is the integumentary system, the skin. Movement. So this is external and internal. You know, the muscular system and the skeletal system working together to propel you through space and time. And then things like blood through the circular system, food through the digestive system. Movement is essential. Responsiveness or irritability. So this has to do with your interactions with the environment. And I put here, ouch, hot pan. You know, you feel it's hot, you pull away. It's instinctual. And that's going to be something external. And then internal, your body notes that your carbon dioxide is high, so your respiratory rate will increase to try to blow off some of that CO2 faster. So this is also important. Digestion, the process of the food breaking down into absorbable and functional molecules. Important for nutrition, and that nutrition-rich blood is then distributed to all body cells by the cardiovascular system, and then those simple molecules that are now enriched with these, nutrients are able to provide energy, etc. for the body. Metabolism. This is a pretty broad term, but it applies to all chemical reactions in the body. And we'll get much further into that when it comes to things like using nutrients and oxygen to produce molecules like ATP, which powers cellular activities. It is chiefly regulated by hormones secreted by the endocrine system. Excretion. So the removal of waste from your body is very important for the maintenance of all of their healthy functions. Excuse me. And the example in the book, the digestive system rids the body of indigestible food through feces. The urinary system disposes nitrogen-containing metabolic waste in urine, and the skin disposes of various waste products as components of sweat. Reproduction. So the production of offspring is at a cellular level and an organismal level. So obviously in cellular production, original cell is dividing, producing. It can be used for body growth or repair. Reproduction of human organism is obviously attributed to the reproductive system. Is this one necessary for your personal human survival? Not necessarily, but certainly cell reproduction is. And then growth, simply an increase in size, cellular body, and it is usually accomplished by an increase in the number of cells. So for growth, cell-constructing activities must occur at a faster rate than cell-destroying ones, and then hormones released by the endocrine system are what plays a major role in directing growth patterns. In addition to the necessary life functions, there's also 5 basic needs for survival. So this would be nutrients, oxygen, water, appropriate temperature, and appropriate atmosphere. So nutrients, generally coming from your food or perhaps some of the drinks you consume, things like carbs, proteins, fats, minerals, vitamins. Oxygen, obviously very important. It affects nutrient absorption, and it's the respiratory and the cardiovascular system working together. Water, 60 to 80% of your body weight, depending on age, is made up of water. So appropriate temperature, so I put Goldilocks because it can't be too hot, it can't be too cold, it has to be just right. Obviously there's a normal range that will vary from person to person, but it's generally what's considered a normal body temperature. And then appropriate atmosphere, the weight of air. So here on Earth we have gravity, and other, a mile under the ocean, we're going to have a different weight around us. So, and just to note that the presence of all 5 of these is not sufficient to maintain life. They have to be balanced in an appropriate amounts. Let's get a little further into the language of anatomy. So anatomical position. This is going to be something very important for you to remember, to recall, to burn into your memory, especially when you're talking about parts of the body as they relate to other parts. So anytime somebody asks you where an injury is or where a body part is, you imagine the person's body in this position, anatomical position. So imagine the body is erect or standing up, the feet parallel, and the arms hanging at the sides with the palms facing forward, and the thumbs, although it might feel unnatural, I encourage you to get up and do this, will be facing away from the body. So again, it's like similar to standing at attention, however, thumbs are facing away from the body. And you can see our little guy on the right is standing in anatomical position. Here are some directional terms. And again, remember, all directional terms are based on the anatomical position. And I'm just going to go over a few of these. We'll go over more of these during our class meeting. So superior or cranial or cephalic is towards the head end or upper part of a structure of the body. The example here is the forehead is superior to the nose. The neck is superior to the chest, etc. Inferior is away from the head end. So the navel, your belly button, is inferior to your breastbone, your chest. Anterior and posterior, so front and back. Medial and lateral, towards the midline, away from the midline. So my wrist is lateral to the chest. My chest is medial to my elbow. Intermediate and proximal. This one's intermediate's a little more difficult between a more medial or a more lateral structure. Proximal is close to the origin of the body, while distal is farther from the origin of the body. So the knee is distal to the thigh. For proximal, the elbow is proximal to the wrist. Superficial, aka external, and deep, internal. So towards the body surface versus away from the body surface. The skin is superficial to the skeleton. The lungs are deep to the rib cage. So everything's relative to something else. And remember, body is always in anatomical position. Here we have body landmarks. This is just another level to that language of anatomy. There are interior landmarks and posterior landmarks, and it can help you be more specific when referring to different regions of the body. And you can please note here the man that is standing with his backside towards us, where we're looking at his posterior or dorsal surface. He's on his tippy toes, which is why you can see his plantar surface, which is actually inferior. It's the sole of your foot. And another layer of the anatomical language, body plans and sections. Just another level of specificity when it comes to identifying parts of the body. So you can see here how different views might miss or capture different organs and sections. This is where you see, this is examples of MRI, so imaging. Which plane would separate the eyes? Remember, you can see in each of these she is standing in anatomical position. So let's think about that. We'll discuss this more in class. So body cavities. There's two primary ones, dorsal and ventral, and then the ventral is broken up further into the abdominopelvic. So a really easy way that I've learned to remember dorsal is dorsal fin. I'm from Florida. We have sharks, we have dolphins, they all have a dorsal fin, it's on their back. So dorsal is backside posterior. It has two subdivisions, the cranial and spinal, although they run kind of right into each other. And then the ventral is much larger than the dorsal and contains all structures within the chest and abdomen. Separating the upper thoracic cavity from the abdominopelvic cavity is the diaphragm. If you can look from the front perspective here, the photo on the right, anterior perspective, you can see that the abdominopelvic cavity contains large and plentiful organs. There is no physical separation happening here, as there is between the upper thoracic and the abdominopelvic. However, it is separated just according to location. So you have the right upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, left upper quadrant, left lower quadrant. So I want you to think about this for a little while. In an automobile accident, which organs or cavity do you think is most vulnerable to injury? And taking into consideration placement, what systems or things are around them that could possibly provide protection, etc. Let's discuss homeostasis. So homeostasis describes the body's ability to maintain relatively stable internal conditions, even though the outside world is continuously changing. So literal translation is going to be homeo, the same, and stasis, which is standing still or unchanging. However, the term really means the dynamic state of equilibrium. Something happens externally, something adjusts internally to compensate or bring the internal environment back to baseline. There are three components: the receptor, control center, and effector. And let's look on the right at the image. It's an example of a negative feedback loop. Much of the body's homeostasis is controlled by negative feedback loops. So first you have the stimulus. Something produces a change in variable. The receptor takes in that information, notices the change, and inputs that information along an afferent pathway to the control center. The control center then via an efferent pathway outputs information along that pathway to the effector. The effector responds and feeds back to reduce the effect of the stimulus and returns variable to homeostatic level. I'll give you an example here on the next slide. So more on that negative feedback loop, or the negative feedback mechanism. The net effect of the response will either shut off the original stimulus or reduce its intensity. So an example would be a home heating system that connected to a thermostat. In the body, negative feedback loops regulate heart rate, blood pressure, breathing rate, the release of hormones, blood levels, glucose, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and minerals. As we move along further in the course, you'll see how each of these things are regulated by negative feedback mechanisms. There are also positive feedback loops. These are much more rare in the body, and they tend to increase the original disturbance, which can cause imbalance in that homeostasis that your body is trying to maintain. Again, we'll talk more about this in later lectures. However, this can cause illness and produces changes associated with aging. So our little critical thinking point. The parathyroid hormone, PTH, is secreted in response to a drop in calcium level in the blood. The secretion of PTH is regulated by a negative feedback mechanism. What can you expect to happen to the calcium blood level as increased amounts of PTH are secreted, and why? Be ready to discuss this in class, and it'll just kind of give us a better sense of how a negative feedback mechanism works. Feel free to send me your questions, comments, or concerns, or have them ready for our class meeting. See you Wednesday.